Liberty Nation. Truth is making a comeback.
Hi, this is Tim Donner with LNTV. Well, Betsy DeVos, Education Secretary, has taken decisive measures to reintroduce due process to college campuses after years of kangaroo courts. Now, you'd think one of the nation's most storied and self-proclaimed guardians of civil liberties would applaud. But Legal Affairs editor Scott Cosenza has written about this on LibertyNation.com and joins us to discuss how they appear to have abandoned the cause. Scott, welcome, and tell us how strengthening due process on college campuses is objectionable to the American Civil Liberties Union.
Well, thank you, Tim. They say that giving the accused the right to confront their accuser, something that is the most basic and fundamental of due process rights in the criminal legal system, is giving the accused too much power. And where that is really anathema to anything about fairness and justice, forgetting about the criminal capacity versus the civil capacity, it's important to talk about, we're not talking about criminal courts here, we're talking about collegiate disciplinary tribunals. So one student says another student touched them inappropriately, for instance, and often they don't go to the police, they just go to the collegiate governance boards. And so then there may be some kind of a hearing. And unfortunately, until now, the Obama administration, halfway through the administration, told colleges, to institute all these rules that discriminated against the people who were charged. And one of those was that they shouldn't have to be able to confront the accusers. So it's just natural to say, oh, you said where and when did this thing happen? Well, here's a photo of you, in Cleveland on the day in question, and you weren't in New York at all. That sort of thing is the kind of thing we may be able to discover through cross-examination. So it's a fundamental notion of fairness anytime you're having an adversarial proceeding. And it's really shocking and appalling that it was discouraged during the Obama administration. I think it's a great win for the liberty of, well, maybe not the liberty, but so many other interests of the men on college campuses today who are chiefly the victims of inappropriate accusations.
Well, Scott, you write in your article about lives that have been ruined by false accusations that were adjudicated in a very un-American way. Have there been multiple instances where a young man's life was ruined with a false accusation?
Tim, the numbers are, I'm sure that we see these instances of false rape reports pale in comparison to genuine rape reports. And I'm sure that that is true. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a sufficient number of false reports. And it's not always rape. It's sometimes lesser than rape. In fact, probably most of the time on college campuses, these allegations are for assaultive behavior that's less than rape. But the instance of false allegations is broad enough that I could tell you about at least a dozen stories that I know the details of, whereby women have made accusations that a man touched them without their consent, and then later on they find out, like, text message that she had maybe sent moments after, to indicating to some friend and confidant that she initiated the contact, and only it was after somebody that had found out about it that then she said it was rape because of the consequences of engaging in it voluntarily. There are many sorts of circumstances like this. This is not to say that most allegations are false. Most allegations are probably true, but enough are false. Any false allegation is too many, as long as that allegation isn't tested and subjected to a fair amount of due process. And that's all that I think the Trump administration has done here. But to say that that's all it's done is an understatement, because of how bad things have gotten because of the Obama administration's demands that colleges revoke the due process rights of college students. And because we're talking about sex discrimination, these are founded in Title IX claims. We're basically talking about men who are the victims when due process is removed. There are some occasional women who are caught up in this as well, but by and large, it's about men being victimized by the system, and hopefully some of that will go by the wayside now.
In terms of the reforms that Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is making to reverse the Obama policies, you also write about how President Obama used the ultimate leverage in forcing campuses to abandon due process. And that leverage would be
funding, their federal funding. That camel's nose gets in the tent, Tim, and that the control goes right out the window. I know there used to be in our country a few schools who were the last of the holdouts. They took no federal funding, and it's not just federal funding for the schools themselves. It gets very tangential. So then it became, if you accepted a student who was borrowing federal dollars to pay for school, then that tuition money that you accepted became federal funding for these regulatory purposes. So I don't know if Hillsdale is still on that list. There were a couple others, though. But for practical purposes, every college and university in the country is subject to these, and these are part of the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR. And so it has the force of law, and unless and until it's changed by Congress or the courts.
Now, in terms of the ACLU, Scott, honestly, the ACLU's always been picking and choosing between causes, mostly leftist causes, but every once in a while they do something like defend the rights of Nazis to march, just to burnish their nonpartisan credentials, so to speak. But have they not, the ACLU, always pretty much been a leftist organization?
I think this is a bit different, Tim, and that's why I chose to highlight it. And what I think the difference here is the ACLU here didn't just refuse to pick up the mantle and carry the torch for these students, but when these protections were announced, they actually said that they're a bad idea. Okay, it's one thing to say we're not going to support or defend gun rights, which they have always done. Basically, they've not taken up the cause of the Second Amendment or the civil rights that I enjoy and you enjoy under our Second Amendment. They've always abandoned that. Okay, fine. But due process rights for accused people, by the way, often based on their sex, is something that they always have championed. And to not just not advocate for it, but in fact to denigrate an effort to give due process rights to people who, as you said in the beginning, some of these people, their lives will be ruined because of these allegations. It's staggering, Tim. And I really think that, along with what we've seen in the past, since the Trump administration, I don't know if they're all suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, and maybe they'll snap out of it after he's gone. But for now, they seem to have just decided to become a leftist progressive organization with a civil rights past, rather than a civil rights organization with a sort of leftist influence. And that's a real shame, I think, for the country.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Tim.
That is Scott Cosenza, who writes on all things legal and illegal on LibertyNation.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel. I'm Tim Donner, and this is LNTV.
Visit us at LibertyNation.com.